Okay, the next piece, 1910, unallocated insurance. So here you'll notice an increase. We're trying to factor in both property valuation increase, so that's cost of replacement that continues to go up, and then this also includes our cyber security insurance. So we do have an initial estimate for projecting increase on insurance costs as we continue to work through with our relationship manager to understand where costs could be. If in time for budget, we can adjust a little bit, but typically we've been fairly close in terms of where insurance costs have gone in the past. We have seen some larger increases, like when we had a project close out and all of that work in progress flips over into the property valuation. That may be an adjustment that has taken place in years past, but other than that, you know, we should be between the insurance here. We have insurance budgeted in the 1620 for boiler insurance. That goes over there. This is mostly our liability insurance. And then we budget in 5510 for transport for buses, for insurance for buses. So our liability auto gets split out into a few different account codes related to the type of cost it is in the insurance. 5510 through 5581. So this covers our student transportation, 5510. 5530 is our garage building costs. 5540 is contract transportation, and 5581 is our additional contract transportation. So one would be direct to outside contractor, the other is BOCES. So we contract with BOCES for our some special needs transportation, as do many districts across the county.
In addition to the BOCES busing contracting, how many runs do we still have with outside contract companies? Because I know we had reduced.
Yep. So right now, we're one or less.
Okay.
So it's between 0 and 1. Okay. You know, sometimes the contractors haven't even been able to meet the needs
of people
of us because of their staffing levels too. So okay. We've taken a lot back in. I did see an email from Mr. Kidd today. He was out driving. We had 15 out this afternoon. Oh. So it still happens in terms of adjusting on a daily basis. But overall, we're in a good spot in terms of where we're staffed as a whole. So we've even taken some of the bus routes back from the BOCES transportation just because BOCES also cannot support some of the needs. So we've tried to find ways of within our own routes to see if we can manage some of those. I mean, it may mean something ends up a little bit longer, but at least they have transportation. Yeah. So here we, within transportation, wage projections based on our current staffing. There's the bus purchase recommendation. We'll jump to that in a minute. And factors in parts, supplies, insurance, those basic costs. And you'll see there's a reduction in contract transportation as it pertains to our staffing levels. So again, last year we cut it in half. We reduced our contract transportation from $1 million to $500,000, and you'll see continue a gradual decrease. Still trying between the salaries and the contract transportation. Between the two of those, really is what are we look at our costs for transportation for salaries or contracting. So here's the memo related to the bus purchase recommendation. This is the piece that's directly in the budget. So we have buses all in the budget. We've gotten to a point where our transportation aid that's being generated off of these purchases, because they're aided over 5 years, amortized over 5 years, so we get 1/5 of the cost reimbursed each year. So we're at a point where we have a fairly steady local share in the general fund. Excuse me. So here it's 971 passenger buses. You can see 3 with luggage boxes. We need luggage boxes for music, sports, those different pieces, you know, for storage. Of approximately, I can't see up on the screen there. 1.8. Yeah, so if you scroll down to the next one, So there's the net. So the net piece is the less the, we'll call it the salvage value, not a trade. But you can see the 2,500 is what we're seeing for trades. We've seen them at 4,500. They continue to just be less and less. And
How old are these buses?
10 years old.
Usually?
Yep. So 10 years essentially is how long we tend to keep the buses. So you can see overall it'd be about 1.806 million. It's up about 2% from prior year as a whole. If you remember, prior year was a little unique. We had about a little over $500,000 budgeted in there for an EV bus, and then we also assigned through a voter proposition, we requested the ability to use $620,000 from our bus reserve to help mitigate local share. Because in essence, what will take place is this is an exclusion under the tax cap. So the difference between the bus purchase and the aid coming in on the buses is the local share that may be raised through taxes. So if we wanted to look at trying to offset a little bit, we did put some more funds into the bus purchase reserve at the end of 23-24. We had a new one created and funded slightly. We would have to make that decision before the March board meeting to have a proposition resolution adopted at that point in time to allow the proper time for the 45-day notice and all those pieces. So just to, put that out there.
How many buses, do we normally do 9 buses a year?
It varies, 9 or 10,
Last year
approximately. Last year was 9. Sometimes it ends up at 10. I feel like we've seen it as high as 11 since I've been here, when the buses are small buses. There's a mix between large and small, because the small buses cost a little less. So the effort, in theory, would be to try to stay as consistent as possible in terms of the cost. Obviously, there's always a little bit of change because of the increase in manufacturer costs for buses. But any way we can try to keep that local share fairly steady and stable helps to not have that go up and down too much each year. So, if we looked at recommending usage of the bus purchase reserve, then I think we'd want to be cognizant of how much, because that impacts the long-term planning and could be a bump in local share if we're not able to support it each year. So just something to keep in the back of the mind. That's why it was a $35,000 increase budget to budget. Thought that perhaps maybe it's not necessary, but as we look at the tax cap and the calculation, when we have a few more conversations before March, then it may be a piece. Questions on transportation?
Matt, do you know about how much there is in the capital bus reserve, the one that?
I want to say 700,000.
Okay, that's
or so.
close enough for our conversation here.
I could look it up, and I probably will before
I could
we're
look
done.
it up in the last board minutes too. So no, thank you.
The next piece of that's not in the general fund budget, because of the mechanism in which they would be purchased, is a proposition to purchase 2 zero emission buses. And here you can see a draft resolution that would have to be adopted at the March board meeting. Total cost of $1.196 million, I believe, which really takes into account the buses at about $562,000 each, plus $72,000 in charging equipment. So those are the pieces there.
Interesting to compare that to the total cost of all 9 of the other buses.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which are less than the 2 electric buses.
And that price has gone up a good 100,000 since the mandate was first put out there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just remind me a little bit around why this is not covered in the general fund and it goes to voter proposition?
So a couple of reasons. First, the grants aren't yet secured, so to put them in the general fund would be a full exclusion to the tax cap.
Got it.
Without any assumptions of grants to be received, which is tough to predict those pieces. And then what it does, and then the aid doesn't flow until a year later on the buses. So any net cost that is aidable, that aid is not going to flow until if you purchase the buses next year. For example, the buses we're buying next year, we won't see 1/5 of that aid until 26, 27. So it's a full upfront cost.
Got it. Yep.
With nothing to offset the local share unless some assumptions and estimates are made in terms of the revenue side, which I think you want to be careful not having that necessarily secured in an effort not to inflate or not estimate enough on the tax cap.
So talk me through again about the grants. So we had the one, was it the Dormitory Authority?
Yep, DASNY, Dormitory Authority of the State of New York. So that one's 400,000, and that's related to the one that was in the 24-25 budget.
Okay.
So there's a local cost that was already built in for 24-25 on that piece. We applied for an EPA grant, of which we talked about they wanted a purchase order before we have any of this approved. So we asked for another extension on submitting those pieces because of our budget timeline and process. We haven't heard back yet from them on that extension, but we're hopeful. And they would only initially give us a 45-day, and we said we'll reapply for it and hope they grant that piece. So we'll see. I don't know that they'll grant it, but there's other the bus incentive program, NYSERDA. Those are other grants that we would look to apply for.
And is this going to be same as the plan for last year was, if we don't get the grants, we're not purchasing these?
We could certainly have that discussion. Yeah, I would say, because then that would impact the local share that would be amortized over the 8 years. So yeah, I mean, that's a big piece of it.
Well, because it would say, as written right now, we would be getting the $1.2 million basically minus grants. So right now, this indicates to me that we'd be buying the buses and hope to get grants to help offset that money. But
Well, it sounds
So
like
we
that's what we're
wouldn't-
asking the
the
voters
plan-
to approve, is
Yeah,
all
the-
the way up to the full
Yeah,
amount.
the plan, in my mind, the plan would be that if it gets approved at the May vote, then even before that, we're working with New York Bus Sales on seeing what other grants we could apply for that could hit that timing for us. And then we wouldn't place an order for buses. We'd be working closely with New York Bus Sales before actually ordering a bus to secure the grants. So it should all work together before we actually are committing to fully buying the bus. And that's what the vendors are doing also. The vendors aren't going to put us on the hook for buying a bus without grants when we're trying to maximize the revenue piece. So in theory, we don't borrow, to see how it all works out. I'm assuming that we would, if the grant money comes next year, we then could net out the borrowing, similar to a capital building project,
Right.
where it's more of those grants are a down payment.
Right.
And then we borrow the remaining for the 8 years, get the aid to flow in on that, and then that's the smaller local share. So
Are we going to lose out on certain grant money if we didn't do it this year? Like if we did not put this up?
they continue to come out with more grants, and right, you keep seeing those pieces. I can't say if we may miss out on one program if it expires, but we've continued to push on all levels for support of this, because to borrow $1.2 million to purchase buses and then spread that out over 8 years with principal and interest minus the aid would just be a large local share on an annual basis.
Oh, I just mean like we don't cross this bridge yet.
Well, yeah, because how are we going to explain to voters what this is actually going to cost? Like what the actual local share is likely to be? Like how is someone going to have the information to kind of make this decision,
Yeah, so we're working with, I've reached out to John Kidd to see if he can try to gather more information from New York Bus Sales to see what grants could we qualify for that could help with this as we're
Yeah.
putting this up, to see if we can have some communications as we work through it. The aid estimate, once we get that information, I'll also be working with some of my resources to say what can be stacked, what's aidable, is it only the local share, or is it only the net cost that's aidable? They did have there was a sheet out at the state level back when the amortization period was 12 years to try to do some estimates with the bus incentive program. But I haven't seen an additional one now that's dropped down to 8, which that just dropped down to 8 this past year. So just to try to do some estimates on those pieces. So we can make some assumptions, get the data, try to make some assumptions to do our best to communicate.
Within this timeline, though.
Yeah.
I think that's what
Yeah.
the board is trying to, so
That's
I
the
think
goal.
what we'll do our best to get this information to you in advance, and if at some point it's not coming fast enough, then you're gonna collectively make a decision. Because
Right.
I'm definitely seeing, even as a taxpayer, why that matters.
Yeah,
So-
and the
Yeah, of
hesitation
course.
and
Mhm.
the information we keep getting from different legislatures and bus sales is that this is not going to be able to happen by 2027. So I'm almost wondering, instead of stressing our community on this right now,
Mhm.
if the state is going to keep kicking it down, maybe we wait another year until the grants are clear and clarified, and we would know exactly what we're asking our community to pay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm sorry, Brian.
No, I was gonna say, Lisa's been very
Oh,
patient
sorry,
over
Lisa.
here, so I don't.
Yeah,
wanna-
please go ahead. I was just gonna say, I think that's why, what I said in the beginning, this is like, we're in the front end of this process, and,
Mhm.
and definitely if we get a sense that we're not getting concrete information, it can't go on, I think, Matt's trying to say that we're gonna make good faith assumptions, but I'm also hearing the board saying, yeah, let's make it, pretty clear. Let's make sure that we have our timeline and it fits perfectly. If it's not fitting, we'll communicate that with you, and then we'll make the adjustment. Like, we don't need to know that tonight. We're just saying that based upon what we know and what we've been trying to accomplish, this, was, I believe, a board priority, and it still is, but if the fiscals aren't lining up, that's what I'm hearing. Let's take a look at it. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, sounds great.
Lisa?
I mean, I agree, and especially with us trying to get a capital improvement project going, I think the timing is a little tricky. The infrastructure, I still have questions about as well, which maybe tonight's not the night to talk about that. But just, I know we had talked about at some point, it doesn't make sense to kind of one at a time add chargers. At some point, we're gonna have to do a project to add a bunch, and so I'm kind of curious where that line is, and then also if we have gotten any more clarity from Fairport Electric on if they can, how many buses they're going to be able to support, how this would affect the PPAC on our citizens' electric bills and all of those components. And I know this has all been a work in progress, but in my mind, whether or not you have the answer today, I still have a lot of lingering questions on infrastructure too before I would feel comfortable moving forward with that.
Sure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this, for those who were at the legislative breakfast, I know at least one of my tables that Brian was also at, this was a topic of conversation, kind of saying it's taking up so much bandwidth and we don't know if it's actually real. And the fact that Governor Hochul said absolutely nothing about it in her budget is just, anyway.
I mean, 2 buses for the cost of 9 buses.
Well, and I also wonder, if we don't have these 2 buses, do we need to make plans to get 2 diesel buses?
No.
Okay.
No, so we decided to keep it totally separate.
Yep.
I did wrestle with, do I do
Gotcha.
7 and 2? Do I try to present a proposition that has 2 diesel or 2 electric? Try to keep it separate,
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
ultimately what we would do is, if the stars all aligned, what we would do is we would get rid of 2 additional diesel buses. So that's what we would do. And we do that kind of through
And I totally understand, we need to have this in place just to give us the ability to move ahead. So I appreciate all the work that's gone
just the
into
ability.
this.
So
Yeah.
it could get approved and you could choose not to move forward.
Right.
So your
So-
certainty with the uncertainty is very helpful.
Mhm.
Yes.
So at this point in time.
Yeah. And that was
A
one
new
of the-
phrase.
That was one of the reasons we kept asking for an extension on the EPA grant, because we didn't technically have an approval to move forward. So for me, there's a hesitation to move forward with issuing a commitment to purchase when we wouldn't have had any of this piece in place. So the reason it's 2 here is 1, for that EPA grant that we had applied for, and then 2, for an additional one that we would apply for grants on. So that's the struggle, is you have to have something in place before you can move forward, and then the grant piece we're applying for to see that if it would, they told us we didn't have to spend it for, I think, a year or 2 years. However, they wanted that commitment from New York Bus Sales, which then we would have had to give New York Bus Sales our commitment. So,
Yeah, and
I totally
reiterate, I
understand.
really appreciate all of these steps you're taking to get us more information and to keep us prepared and flexible, because I know it's a lot of work in a really ambiguous kind of situation. So thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, and my piece was just to be sure if we were looking to do it, we'd have the approach and process in place.
This will be part of my communications with the board in advance, so we're prepared. So this is helpful. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so the next piece, jumping into benefits, and that entails the pension systems, our health insurance, dental insurance, workers' comp, our FICA med, social security costs, those percent of wages. And as a whole, you can see the main piece of increase here, the largest piece, is the health insurance. 90/60. So 90/60, 800. So right now, that's projected at about a 12.5% budget-to-budget increase. At this point last year in the process, we were at a budget-to-budget, I want to say, of around 3% or so, because the way we budget, we look at expenses and then project an increase for the second half of the next fiscal year, which we typically project about 10% for an increase in costs. We saw over a 14% increase January 1st of 25. So now we're adjusting for that cost from January 25 through June of 25 in projecting out next January 26.
Because
costs.
this one is by calendar year, not our
Correct. It's
academic
by calendar
Okay.
year. So in essence, we have a pretty good estimate for July through December. And then we're projecting an increase on January 1. And that increase is not just an increase to account for premium increase, but also to try to project, it's open enrollment as well when we hit January. So there could be some plan changes that take place in January. So, we try to project new plans, and be modest on that, not too aggressive, because sometimes we can get changes from value to high deductible, which then ends being a premium reduction. So trying to blend all those different pieces that could happen next school year.
And these are all contractually obligated through our collective bargaining?
Yes, yep, contractually obligated. So we look at the premium costs and, our current, like I said, we're looking at the bills in January, the bills in February, seeing where they're landing for both RASH 2, which is the largest of the consortiums. We have RASH 1, and then we look at the Medicare Advantage plan, the Aetna costs. And we saw, you may or may not have been at some presentations, I think there was some given across the county to superintendents, school boards, business officials surrounding the Inflationary Reduction Act and how that had an impact on healthcare costs as well.
So is that, so I understand a big part of that is that these plans are going to be, in all likelihood, based on how the law is going to be interpreted, picking up more of the prescription drug costs compared to what's paid out of pocket by retirees. So are we kind of baking that in as we move along?
Yeah, so what it does is it increase the premium costs. So folks see premium costs increase, but then they see their costs.
They're out of pocket.
Their out-of-pockets
Yeah.
drop. So,
Right.
But the premium costs are hitting employers
Right.
for the most part.
So we have that information, though, at least
Yes,
to
yep.
start out. Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Yeah. Unless they make any other change for 26, but I mean,
Or tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah. So right now that's where we are budget to budget on the healthcare. And again, like I said, it's readjusting for what took place in January of '25. So, employer retirement system and teacher retirement system, you see the rate projection increases there. Average contribution rate for ERS from 15.2% to 16.5%. Last year, to give you an idea, that increase was 13.1 to 15.2. So there was over a 2% increase last year in budget development. So the budget would have been higher because the percent of salary increase was higher than what this one's projected at as a whole. But we are budgeting for the contribution rate at that 15.2. So budget to budget, about 360,000. You can see in the details, or a little over 12%. And then TRS projected to decrease in rate. Still does have a slight impact to budget in terms of an increase because, remember, it's a percent of wages. So projecting wage increases then has that impact in terms of where that is. But it's only 175,000 currently projected increase in costs, or 3.3% to the TRS cost. And workers' comp is down. Workers' comp is based on experience. We're part of a consortium, and they do look at the experience ratings over the years, average out, look at 3 years worth, and we had a higher year fall off than what we had come on. So that's where you see our decrease in workers' comp costs. We were up 100,000 from 23-24 to 24-25 because of our experience. Any questions on the benefits? Overall, all benefits together, about 3.97 million. So of the increase, now there are some netting factors in other places for decreases, but that's a big player in the increase for this portion of the budget. And then the last piece is debt service and interfund transfer. We couple these two together because we have in our budget, our serial bond payments and costs are budgeted as a transfer to our debt service fund. And then when we have short-term borrowings, like a bond anticipation note, just before some of those go to long-term borrowings, we have principal paydowns, and those are budgeted direct out of general fund. So you can see there's two different areas there. And we do have overall a decrease in debt service, about 541,000, and that is between, it's related to, we have an older project. Two older projects, we actually did a refunding back in 2015, essentially a refinance of debt that qualified for refinancing. And we had payment dropping down $1 million on that particular borrowing. On the revenue side of the budget, we have revenue dropping off of $1 million as well. So we'd see that piece between the two. And then we have our 2019 capital improvement project, additional phased-in debt for that project coming in. So between those, it's netting out to that little over $500,000 of a decrease in the debt service. And that does play into the tax cap, because any local share piece is able to be raised through the tax levy limit, or the tax cap. And questions on the debt service and how that plays in? Great. So that's a summary of where we are today in the non-instructional portion of the budget. We'll continue. There will be some pieces that we will continue to true up through the process. Some of those areas include, we'll continue to watch health insurance, but we did have January's bill in. I wouldn't anticipate February to be a lot different, but if it's a swing either way, I always hope for it to be less than January's bill. But if it does swing, sometimes even a $10,000 change over 12 months does impact the budget development for us a little bit. ERS and TRS, right now we're projecting total salaries based on budget, so I'll be looking at actual salaries when making that calculation when we go final for the TRS and ERS and FICA Med budget lines. Those are ones that we look right at our full salary budget. Right now, it's based on a projection of prior year.
Matt, can I back you up really quick? I may have just missed this when I was thinking about electric buses. That's not what my question's about. But on the 5510 line with district transportation services, there's a kind of unique situation for your budgets because you're so careful with everything. I'm just curious why in the 24-25 our projected expenditures are more than what was in the budget, and then next year we're proposing a lower budget than what our this year's projected expenditures are. Usually that's not the pattern with.
Yeah, which specific line?
So in 5510 district transportation services, our 2024-25 budget was 7.8 million, and our projected expenditures are 8.4 million. And then for next year, our proposed budget is 8.1.
I can find.
So I'm just curious why we're going up.
5510.
Sorry, it's on page 5,
You're looking
the
at
very top line.
photo. To give me 1 second
Yeah.
here. Oh, because you have, so we look at the adjusted budget. So just really quick, so so when you look at this document, you'll have the original budget, and
Okay.
then you'll also have an adjusted budget. So the adjusted budget involves any carry forward purchase orders from prior year to current year, or budget adjustments based on any approved adjustments. Here, it's going to be related to the bus purchases because we had $620,000 approved for usage from the bus purchase reserve. It, in essence, we adjust the budget according to that after approval. So the adjusted budget is in the 5510, the adjusted budget's 8.7 million, and
Okay.
projected expenses are 8.4 million.
And then we just don't think that next year we'll need as much, or is it the same?
Because
where
we
once
adjusted the budget by
adjust it-
620,000, that's the key piece there. So that was a one-time usage in 24-25 and approval. If we were to propose a bus purchase reserve usage again, what it would do is it would drop down the bus purchase line. So if you
And then we
remember,
would adjust it again.
and then if approved, so remember we did 3 buses exact in case it got defeated, then we just would only purchase 6 buses in 24-25. But once that got approved, then if you scroll up to 5510-20 or 210, 5510-210, you can see original budget was 1.77 million, and adjusted budget's 2.6 million.
That makes sense.
That's
Thank
where
you.
that
Just
came
usually you
from.
don't see that. The
Not
change,
always,
so that
yeah.
makes sense to me. Thank you.
It's been a while since we've seen it in that line, but you will see it when we have in buildings and grounds is another good example. If we have purchase orders for work done at the end of a fiscal year, and that work's not able to be completed yet, that money carries forward to the next year. So in the directed facilities lines, it could have been an original budget of $1 million in a line, but $500,000 carry forward. So adjusted budget showed 1.5 million, and then projected expense should align in theory with that adjusted budget a little bit. So does that help? Does that?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
I was thinking I looked at this pretty carefully and I didn't miss it.
I wasn't thinking I was catching you in a mistake. It was more like, that's something I don't
Well,
understand.
it
So I
can
would like to ask
happen.
the question.
I'm not
Yeah.
perfect, so.
Hello, just checking, does anybody else have any more questions before we move into exec? I know there had been some we sent ahead to Superintendent Provenzano, so he could get them. Did anybody have any left over from there?
Just really quick, Matt, the rate, the increase from this year to last year, I believe is like 6-point-something%. About where does that compare to last year, previous years? And I know this is first pass, but just.
It's not a, it's tough because it's not a perfect comparison and you have different variables a little bit each year.
Okay.
Last year at this point in time, we were 6.1 million or 8.3% increase. However, there are a couple pieces there. We had ERS and TRS were up $1 million. We had buses
coming on.
down, we had contract transportation down $500,000. We had debt increasing last year. So on the revenue side, we had an increase in aid. So there were a few different factors that played into that piece. Our health insurance was not up as high from last year to this year at this stage in our budget development as we are right now. So it's,
There,
there's a couple variables.
but that's not a noteworthy number, like, it's not an, oh my gosh, number of increase. It has been increased that way in the past. No,
It's part of the process.
yeah.
Part of the process,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, also, if you think in here, there's between 400 and 500,000 of an increase related to building condition survey.
Right.
That wasn't in last year's. So there's a couple of pieces that, if we're able to navigate through current year budget, then we could take that burden off of next year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Any others? Feeling good? All right. Can I get a motion to enter executive session?
So moved. I'll second.
Dr. Morris, Mrs. Fortuna.
Mhm.
To everybody watching at home, we won't be making any decisions in executive session. Oh, the executive session was matters relating to the performance of an individual not in a collective bargaining unit. I apologize, I didn't read the full motion because my computer froze. All right. We won't be making any decisions, and once we come out of executive, we will just vote to end the meeting and be done. So, all in favor?
Aye.
That passes 5-0. Thank you and good night.